Formula 1 has held its first collective 2026 test. Sort of. The 10 current teams stayed behind in Abu Dhabi to run a mule car each, simulating next year's downforce levels, trialling the actual 2026 tyres, and running some curious experimental items. Combined with the young driver portion of the test, there were 25 drivers on track in total across the day, 15 of whom will actually be racing next year, including Isaac Hadjar, getting used to his new surroundings at Red Bull Racing, and his Racing Bull's successor and F1 rookie, Arvid Lindblad. Cadillac and its drivers weren't included, as this test forms part of the current season, and they wouldn't be allowed to bring along the 2023 Ferrari that they've been privately testing. So they've missed out on some valuable early 2026 running, and make no mistake, the 2026 elements meant this was way more important than the traditional postseason test. Pirelli's mule car program developing the 2026 tyres has been rumbling away in the background all year, with 12 two-day sessions across 8 circuits, before the final day in Abu Dhabi after the season finale. This one was more significant though. It's the first time that all the current teams have been brought together, and so we were able to learn plenty. We got our first look at some prototypes simulating the kind of movable front wing system that will be used in F1 next season. Next year, the all-new 2026 cars will feature active aerodynamics on both the front and rear wings to reduce drag on the straights. That aero profile is being approximated on the mule cars by only using wing levels that were raced at Monza this year, and using the rear wing drag reduction system on more than just the normal long straights that are designated as DRS zones on race weekends. But in 2026, the front and rear wings will be opened whenever a car is in a part of a track designated by the FIA as not being traction limited, and we got the first taste of that in Abu Dhabi. Permission was given to teams to develop a system that could reduce the angle of attack of the uppermost element of the current front wings to use in the test, to simulate the opening we'll see next year. It provides the teams and Pirelli with an initial estimate on the impact of drag levels and tyre load impacts to compare. Mercedes ran a slightly crude design on Kimi Antonelli's mule car in the test, with an actuation system on the upper elements of the front wing, connected via large tubing to an internal system housed within the nose cone. Ferrari had a much more refined version on display. It has already developed a system that was used in Pirelli's private mule car testing, so it was unsurprisingly more subtle, the actuator on the front wing being connected by what looks like a carbon stem tucked neatly behind the wing and feeding back under the nose cone. This created the novelty of seeing front wings being opened on straights for the first time. But the systems are basic, and the real thing in 2026 will be quite different. For starters, a much bigger part of the front wing will move, as teams can choose between opening the top 1 or 2 elements of the wing, and they can decide between a hydraulic or electric actuator. Another experimental element in the Abu Dhabi test related to wheel rims that have been standardised since 2022. While the mule car running has largely been conducted on adapted versions by the standard supplier, next year teams will have more freedoms with the designs, and in Abu Dhabi they were permitted to conduct a limited number of runs with a wheel rim similar to what they'll use in 2026. McLaren was initially believed to be the only team to bring its own wheel rims to this test, but then Williams appeared with exposed wheels, without the covers we've been accustomed to in the current rules era.
Today's video is brought to you by Rovo, your AI teammate from Atlassian. Rovo connects knowledge, people and workflows so teams can work smarter and move faster. It helps people find answers, make decisions and automate work securely and with context through search, chat, agents and studio. Rovo runs on the Teamwork Graph, Atlassian's intelligent layer that unifies data across all of your first and third-party apps so no knowledge gets left behind, and so you always get personalised AI insights from day one. And the best news? It's already built into Jira, Confluence and Jira Service Management paid subscriptions, so the power of Rovo is already at your fingertips. Know the feeling when AI turns from tool to teammate. If you Rovo, you know. Discover Rovo, AI that knows your business, powered by Atlassian. Get started at ROV, as in victory, o.com today.
When Ferrari and Mercedes were running their experimental front wing design, they had an unusual advantage over the other 8 teams. They didn't have to conform to a speed limit on the straights. A 300km/h straight line speed limit was imposed on the mule cars for this test, but not because there was any fear of them falling apart or anything like that. It fits with Pirelli's method through the entire mule car program of using the DRS on the rear wing on most straights wherever possible. In Abu Dhabi, this meant that instead of being restricted to using the DRS zones on the 2 long back straights, drivers in the mule cars could also use the DRS on the start-finish straight and on the run from the exit of turn 2 to the turn 5 hairpin. But the normal mule cars only have the usual DRS on the rear wing. So when that is activated, there is a disproportionate amount of load on the front axle. When the real 2026 active aero works, both wings will back off into low drag mode, so there will be significantly reduced load on both axles. The speed limit helps balance out the load more between the two axles, because the faster the current ground effect cars travel, the more aggressive the loading is. If you only activate the DRS on the rear wing, that causes a big balance shift and overloads the front axle. While it may seem trivial on the straights, tyre temperatures can still change a huge amount. In Baku, for example, on the long run from the final real corner to turn 1, front tyre temperatures drop more than 30 degrees, and this will be even greater with the 2026 active aerodynamics on the front wing. So running the test with this speed limit gave the teams and Pirelli slightly more useful data on how the 2026 tyres would behave on the real thing. This group test was a significant conclusion to the 2026 mule car programme, even though the final specification of the tyres had been signed off for some time in terms of both construction and compound. Although the FIA's homologation deadline is not until next week, the early confirmation is because of the need to produce and ship the tyres not only for the test, but also pre-season running and the early races next year. This test is useful for Pirelli to evaluate its choices, but Pirelli's motorsport director Mario Isola argues this test is more important for the teams, given it gives them all the chance to sample the definitive 26 tyres as part of their preparations for next year. Teams will be able to compare the performance of the final product to both their previous experience over the past 14 months of testing the evolving prototype tyres, and how it correlates with the virtual tyre model Pirelli provides them with. They will also be able to understand how the contact patch, the part of the tyre that is touching the track surface but varies constantly with load, behaves, and other characteristics of the narrower tyres. These are not simply a scaled down version of the 2025 tyres, because the change in size has necessitated a complete redesign. In the earlier 2026 tyre tests, Pirelli decided the run plans, but in Abu Dhabi, teams had free rein to do what they want, which amplifies how much they can learn even further. While the tyre test is useful to the teams, it falls a long way short of how useful it would be to run using the as yet non-existent 2026 cars. The mule cars are not anything like the real cars that will race next year, simply a best possible approximation using current spec machinery. By F1 standards, they are a make and do botch job. While Abu Dhabi is not a maximum downforce track, the change in configuration means significantly reduced downforce levels compared to the Grand Prix weekend. The lap times reflected this, with the fastest mule car time a 1 minute 25.170 set by Mercedes driver Antonelli. That's 1.4 seconds slower than the fastest time of the test itself, set by Aston Martin young driver Jack Crawford in a normal 2025 car, 2.5 seconds slower than the best Mercedes qualifying time, which was the closest deficit of all 10 teams in the test compared to the race weekend, given the average deficit was 3.93 seconds. Now, it's fair to say that Antonelli's lap wasn't a no-holds-barred qualifying simulation, but it is at least roughly in keeping with the ballpark performance loss recently suggested by FIA single-seater director Nicholas Tombasas of being in the region of 1 or 2 seconds off the current cars. However, lap time is a one-dimensional metric. Williams team principal James Vowles says the mule cars are just too far away to give a clear read on 2026 with the real work done in the simulator. That's because aero balance characteristics of the mule cars will not be a fair representation of the actual 2026 cars. The ride will be different given the 26 ride heights will be higher and mechanical characteristics of the suspension changed, plus the endless tiny details that aggregate to define the performance, feel and behaviour of a car will all be off. For the drivers, it's also of limited use, as they used outgoing power units. This means that crucial elements of driving the 2026 cars, such as managing the energy recovery systems and modifying the driving technique to maximise harvesting potential, was off the table. None of this means the test was a waste of time. The mule cars have at least given teams some real-world tyre data to assimilate into their models before the first real tests begin at Barcelona next month.